virtual room fill up a little bit. So we'll just have standard awkward silence at the start of these before we get going. Can see people are coming in dribs and drabs, so we'll just give it a couple more minutes and then get cracking with things. If anyone does want to communicate or pass any messages through, then feel free to use the chat. Look at Claire, what a pro, straight in there. With a message to the panelists. Hi Claire, nice to have you in here. So yeah, do feel free to put a message in the chat if you've got questions to ask. We'll talk about that in a minute, but we'll just give it a couple of minutes and let the room fill up, and then we'll get cracking. Okay, so while people are still coming in, I suppose I should introduce myself. My name's Matt Taylor. I'm a family lawyer here at Stowe Family Law, funnily enough, based in Liverpool and Manchester offices. And I'm joined by my wonderful co-host Jen Hudec, who's an associate in the family team here as well, and a really brilliant lawyer. So we have the fortunate responsibility of hosting the Breakup Club. So for those of you who are new to Breakup Club and the things that we do at Stowe, it's our series of free, very informal webinars that deal with really the holistic side of divorce and separation. We're not going to talk too much law tonight because goodness knows you don't want to hear that on a Tuesday evening, I'm sure, but it's to do with all the other things of how people can deal with a separation. It's one of the number of free resources that we offer here at Stowe. I signpost everyone, and we'll do this at the end as well, to, if you're not familiar with it, we have a website which is Stowe Support, and that is our home where we host all our webinars, all our breakup clubs, all the Stowe Talk sessions, also our podcast series, which is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Rate, like, and subscribe. It's like a Pavlovian response to say that after mentioning the podcast. And Sue who's our guest for tonight, has joined us on one of those before. So that's a little bit about Stowe. I will pass over to Jen, who's going to introduce tonight's special guest.
Thanks, Matt. So yeah, we're really thrilled to welcome back Dr. Sue, who we've worked with before and has always been absolutely fantastic. Tonight she's going to speak on the topic of discernment counselling. In other words, tackling the big question of, and try not to sing this one, should I stay or should I go? Sue, who has an entire alphabet of academic accolades after her name, is a certified divorce coach and wellness coach and a discernment counsellor. Her specialism is working with professional men and women throughout the divorce process, particularly women over 40 going through divorce and menopause. Sue runs the Divorce Coaching Academy, training the next generation of coaches. And she's won a number of awards for her work with divorcees, which is really testament to her depth of experience and knowledge in this area. On a very real level though, Sue herself is a divorcee following a 25-year marriage, and she has 2 children. So put succinctly, she gets it. She knows what it feels like to be contemplating, working through and coming to terms with a divorce. So as I said, we're absolutely thrilled to welcome back Sue, aka the Divorce Doctor, to speak this evening. Over to you, Sue.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. I'm going to minimize all the people that I can see. Okay, so as Jen just said, I'm Sue Palmer-Conn, aka the Divorce Doctor, and I've been working as a divorce coach and discernment counsellor for the past 12 years. As a divorce coach, you might find it a bit strange that I will do everything in my power to prevent divorce, because like all good doctors, my maxim is prevention is better than cure. I actually trained as a discernment counsellor before I trained as a divorce coach, and that to me is one of the most rewarding parts of what I do. Over the years, I've worked with over 1,000 men, women, couples, and even their children. As well as being a divorce coach, I'm also a chartered psychologist specialising in attachment disorders. I qualified as an educational psychologist and then transitioned into forensics. So the talk is all about, should I stay or should I go? Huge decision for anybody. So many couples spend a long time wondering if they should make up or break up. Divorce is not an emergency situation. It's not an emergency solution. It's not caused by a single catastrophic event, but more often there's been many hundreds of small events building up over the years, leading to couples disconnecting from each other. Clients can benefit from working with a divorce coach at any stage of their divorce journey. I've had clients from make-up or breakup decisions right the way through the divorce journey, divorce recovery, and I even had someone come back several years later saying they were thinking about getting remarried and could I help them avoid making the same mistakes. Working with a divorce coach alongside a family lawyer brings many benefits. It can help clients concentrate on the business of divorce with their legal team rather than the divorce story, thus saving them time, money, and stress. A divorce coach can help clients ask the right questions, understand the answers. They can help clients avoid some of the more common pitfalls in the divorce journey because they're able to respond, not just react. They can help them prepare for court, if it gets that far, by working on mindset and confidence. They can help with co-parenting, planning. They can help with blended families. They can help clients look after their physical and emotional health, and even help with post-divorce career planning and budgeting. However, today I want to talk about working with a discernment counsellor, which is best done as soon as one partner mentions the D word. So once you've gone too far down the divorce route, it's probably too late for discernment counselling. So let's have a look at what discernment counselling actually is. Discernment itself means to be able to judge well and make the right informed choices. It helps you to understand where the problems are in your marriage, what role you played in those problems, and to decide if there's a long-term solution to the problems. It helps you create an agenda for change for yourself and for your relationship, whichever path you choose to go down. In every marriage breakdown, there would be one partner who is more leaning into the relationship and really wants to save the marriage, whilst the other is leaning out and perhaps wants to end the marriage to end the stress. So what's this mean in practice? I'm sure most of you have heard about the grief cycle, which is normally applied to bereavement. However, we see divorce as being a form of grief itself. Grief of loss of the future, the family as we know it, the dreams, the relationship, the companionship, the joint income, etc., etc. And like any grieving process, it's not linear. If I was to draw it out accurately, it would look more like a spirograph picture. When going through divorce and separation, we move through all these different phases that you can see on this cycle at very different rates, depending on whether you're the leaver or the left. The leaning out partner may be much further along the grief cycle than the leaning in partner. Especially if they've been having an affair, they may even skip out several stages and be at the acceptance stage, while the leaning in partner may still be at the shock and denial stage. However, even after an affair, things can still be saved as long as both partners are open and honest with themselves and with each other. What was the reason for the affair? It's never one-sided. So looking at discernment counselling, I always think about it as bridging the gap between marriage guidance and divorce. before many people go down the divorce route, they often try marriage guidance first. And for 70% of them, it fails. The same sort of question is you can ask about going down the divorce route. Once you started the divorce route, but both of you agreed it was the best or only route. So many times during the coaching sessions, I hear people say, it wasn't my decision. I really didn't want to do it. So there is a way to see which is the right path for you. You need to decide as a couple which is the best way to resolve the marriage problems and understand the role in the breakdown. And this is all about what discernment counselling is all about. Problem with jumping straight into marriage guidance is that if one partner is leaning out of the relationship, they're not going to be fully committed to saving it and go along just to pay lip service. And that's why 70% of couples who go straight into marriage guidance end up separating and divorcing. It's the same with jumping straight into divorce. The leaning in partner is going to be so far behind in their mindset and in the grief cycle, they're going to get hurt and upset. And to be successful, both partners should be in full agreement that either they're fully committed to saving the marriage or fully committed to going through divorce with the least animosity that they can. So when you start discernment counselling, you're presented with 3 potential paths. And the aim of discernment counselling is to find a solution with which both of you are comfortable and confident is the right solution for you and your family. Path 1, which you think probably very few people will choose, is where you stay exactly as you are, with the future looking no different from the past. So if you've been arguing a lot, you carry on arguing. But we hope even in this option, after discernment, things calm down. In fact, 10% of clients choose this path. I was surprised when I first started looking at discernment, how many people did decide to stay as they were. But the majority of them are either couples in the 60s or 70s where it feels just easier to maintain the status quo, or couples where there are special circumstances that would make it easier just to stay as they are. In this current climate, we're finding more and more people are opting for path 1 because they just can't afford to get divorced. Path 2 is where couples both decide that there's no way their problems can be resolved by staying married, but want to divorce with as little acrimony as possible and go down the dignified divorce route. And from the research, we know that 42% of couples end up here. Path 3 is where couples, having worked through and accepted their relative contributions to the marriage problems, decide that there's something worth saving and undertake 6 months of family therapy with divorce off the table. The remaining 48% of couples go down this path. And when they do this, 70% go on to have a successful marriage. So discernment counselling is shifting the balance to success in one way or the other.
So just going back to path 1, and you mentioned, stay as you are. Is that something you're seeing a lot of at the moment because of the economic climate? Is that something that's increased maybe in the sort of past 6 months?
Yeah, it
cost of
has.
living and things.
Yeah, it has definitely. People just cannot see how they can, even if they, they really would like to get divorced, they can't see how they can afford to live on one income, to afford 2 houses. So we're seeing
yeah, and when you're having those conversations with someone who, you know, they would go if they thought they could see a future for them that was better, are there sort of tips and things that you can give them to kind of make the future of the marriage, while you have to kind of, while you remain codependent, kind of more manageable? And is it something that they can maybe revisit in the future? Because it's just, it seems quite a bleak kind of prospect to kind of be trapped in that marriage for, you know,
it
because
does,
of the
but more and more
finances.
people are now trying out nesting.
Mm.
So they will go to stay with family or friends when it's not their turn to be with the children.
So that's where, just to explain for anyone who's not familiar, that's where the children stay in the family home.
Yeah, the children
and the
stay in the
parents,
family home and the parents alternate.
Hmm.
What we're also finding with, it's a modified nesting arrangement so that it's less disruptive for the children. So they might have 2 nights on their own with the children. The other one has 2 nights on their own. And then at weekends, they might have family time or,
Yeah,
you know, but the sleeping arrangements are modified.
yeah, yeah. Okay, no, that's really interesting. Thank you.
I didn't see so much of that with younger couples prior to the downturn in the economy.
Okay.
So thinking about what's the difference between discernment counselling and marriage therapy or marriage guidance, the biggest difference is that it is very short term, because we're not working on finding solutions for the bulk of the time. It's the individuals are alone with the counsellor, looking at their version of where the problems are and what their role was in it. So that's where all the real work is done on a one-to-one basis. But for each session, both partners have to come, because we have time together, time separate, time together, time separate, and then end up time together. It's, when I say it's short term, it's between 1 and 5 sessions. And at the end of each session, you get an agreement whether they're going to come back for the next session. And the aim is to get both partners to a point where they're comfortable and confident they've made the right decisions for themselves and the family. So in each session, as I say, the hard work is done in the individual time. So we start off with about 10 minutes or so, where the couple talk through where they are with the decision. And then each partner has 30 to 40 minutes individually with the counsellor, exploring what they see as the problems in the relationship, the part they've played in it to get to that point. And then at the end of each of the individual sessions, they summarise what they've talked about, including a potential agenda for change. And the agenda for change is how they see they have to work on themselves and on the relationship in order to get it back on track. And it's that bit that is the most transformative, getting them to actually commit to this agenda to change. And then partners swap and they go through the same scenario with the other partner. From the counsellor's viewpoint, it's so interesting to see different perspectives on the same problem. And one of my roles is to actually get them to look at the problems from their partners and the children's perspectives. And very often this is the first time they've ever thought about how it looks from the other's point of view. And certainly very much the first time they've actually thought about how the children are viewing the situation. And then in the very final time together, when the second partner has summarised what they've gone through, what they've talked about, I always ask them, do they want another session? and 99% of them want to carry on after the first session, and the vast majority of people take the full 5 sessions. So if they decide on path 2, I can then work with them as a couple to help them to plan their divorce, working with them alongside either a mediator or the family lawyer, often in a collaborative way, or a lot of couples are now choosing the one couple, one lawyer setup. And hopefully doing it this way, they're going to remain a lot more amicable, if not friendly. But it does allow them to divorce with dignity and without too much acrimony. Occasionally they'll want separate coaches, and in this case I'll refer them on to one of my colleagues. If they choose path 3, which is, as I say, 6 months of marriage guidance with divorce off the table, then I'll either refer them on to a marriage counsellor, or if they prefer to work with me, because they've got used to the way I work, I'll take them through a marriage makeover mastermind where we can work on things like connection, communication, self-care, care for the other, and always being cognizant of the problems that got them there to that point in the first place. It's, as I say, it is one of the most interesting parts of my coaching experience. And at the moment, I'm the only qualified divorce counsellor in the country, but I am starting to run courses from April onwards to train people as a discernment coach rather than a counsellor, because the counselling goes into very much into the therapeutic elements as well. So as you can see, it's the sort of place that couples really should think about before they make any final decision. And I'm now getting a lot of referrals from mediators, especially, who see that the couples are not fully committed to the divorce, but one partner may be further along the road. And it just helps people to get their future sorted in their own head before they make the final decision. So if anybody wants to contact me, email address is drsue@divorcedoctor.com or divorce-doctor.com. The first doctor is a DR, the second doctor is the full word. And if you want to know more about discernment counselling, then I've got some stuff on the website. So time now for any questions.
Thanks. So that's really interesting, and I think I'll delve into the questions in a minute. The probably to link it a little bit to what we do in the legal side, which will keep very brief because it's very boring. But I think what we see all the time is people being at different paths along the journey and that cycle and the grief cycle that you talk about, and it can be incredibly difficult. And it's not always necessarily the person who's made the decision to end the relationship actually who's further on in the process. It usually is, but it can, everyone goes through these processes and these cycles in different speeds, and it can be quite difficult if you are trying to negotiate finances or negotiate what happens with the children, if you're at different points, if someone's still in a sort of denial phase and kind of won't grasp anything, and someone's acceptance, it's very hard to have those have really effective kind of discussions when you're just in a completely different headspace. And my clients will get frustrated about that. Well, why can't he or she see what I see? It's like, well, they're at a different place in the emotional journey. Is that something that you see a lot of as well, Jen? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought Sue's comment in relation to acknowledging your own role in the relationship breakdown was a particularly interesting one, because particularly when you're dealing with cases of, you know, adultery, or maybe not that far, but where someone feels that they have been emotionally cheated on, shall we say, it can be really, really challenging to sit there and think, well, have I had anything to do with this? Surely this is outside of my control. So Sue's role there is, I think, particularly interesting. And Sue, a question I had for you is, how would you work with someone who was struggling to see where they sat in the relationship breakdown?
This is quite common when you first start off. People just want to blame and shame and don't accept the responsibility themselves. But if you think about the way the marriage cycle goes, as well as the grief cycle, you know, you're all lived up to start off with. And then as things settle down and children come along, you've got different career pathways. You know, if you've got a stay-at-home mum and a dad that's off working all the time, you know, dad wants to relax when he comes home and mum wants to dump the kids on him to have a break herself. And it causes so much stress because they don't talk about it. They don't talk about these things before they get married. You know, nobody plans to get divorced, but very few people plan the marriage. You know, they plan the wedding, they spend thousands of pounds and hours of organisation planning the wedding. But how many people actually think about how are we going to deal with finances? Are you a spender or a saver? What's your relationship with money? When are we going to have children? Are we going to have children? How are we going to parent them? What are our views on career? Is my career as important as your career? And because we don't always discuss these things before the marriage, they can cause a lot of tensions the further you get into the marriage. And especially if you've had a less than perfect childhood yourself, you see problems from childhood, maybe fear of rejection or attachment disorders creeping through into the marriage. And if you get over, you know, you feel that they're not listening to you, they're not helping you, they're not compensating for your fears. And because people don't talk, instead of going along parallel roads, they then start veering off. And when the disconnection starts, it can rapidly deteriorate until it becomes not just disconnection, but distaste and disdain. And, you know, even when you think about somebody going off and having an affair, why? Well, your needs not, you know, my needs weren't being met. Well, did you actually talk about what your needs were? So, you know, we can look behind what expectations there were, what their family history was, have they talked about it? You know, what are their feelings? Do they feel neglected or rejected?
There's a lot goes into it, and I think the lack of communication is a big issue. And you talk about those tracks pulling away, and you know, sort of becoming distaste, which is quite a helpful phrase, and that can lead to a lot of things. We've got a few questions, so we'll move on to that. I just wanted to, before we do, setting aside kind of abuse cases which are a bit different, and assuming there's no abuse in the relationship, do you think
that's one thing I should have said before I take on any clients? I do an abuse screening, and I won't take on for discernment counselling anyone that has been subjected to or perpetrating any form of abuse.
Good to know, definitely, and that's a completely different set of scenarios. But assuming no divorce, do you think that? Just interested. Do you think every marriage is sort of savable at the stage? You know, if you catch it early enough, you know, on that sort of downswing of the cycle that with the graph that you get at the start, and you get discernment. Do you think fundamentally, you know, any relationship is savable, or do you see somewhere it's just it was never going to be savable?
I wouldn't say every marriage is savable, but there's a lot of marriages that are savable that just go through, you know, the motions of divorce, and then, you know, how do they feel afterwards when they realise that it wasn't really what they wanted?
Okay. Well, so let's jump into some of the questions here. So, I'm actually going to go to the most recent one first, just because it leads on from what we were saying then. So something that Claire sent through is this sort of counselling a no-go if one party's absolutely decided they want a divorce. Is that kind of, you know, does anyone do an about turn? You know, if someone said, right, that's it, I definitely want divorce, and they go into discernment counselling and they kind of, and they maybe backtrack of that, or is that too late at that stage? I think it's the sort of timing question.
The timing question is important. However, a couple that I have just finished working with now as discernment, they've moved into marriage makeover now. She was absolutely adamant divorce was all she wanted. He was the one that contacted me, but she said, you know, I'll come to the discernment just so that we can I can make sure that, you know, we know what we're doing, and we've tried everything. And I'm not afraid to ask the awkward questions. This particular woman was having an emotional affair, not a physical affair, but an emotional affair. And one of the questions I asked in the first session on a one-to-one, was she prepared to give this person up? It was a work colleague, and just see him as a colleague and not see him outside work. No, she wasn't. But on the next question, who's the most important, husband or colleague? Well, husband, of course. And that just doesn't tie up. And so exploring in more depth what you know, why she felt she needed the support of the emotional support from somebody outside the marriage, just came to the forefront that it all stemmed back from when the little girl was born, and she really wanted her husband to work 4 days a week so that she could have a day to be herself and not just mum or wife. But she'd never talked about it. And so once we got them actually talking about independence and role and identity, things started to change. And by the end of the 5th session, she was absolutely flabbergasted that, you know, she realized that she really didn't want to lose him. I don't know whether it was the question I asked about, do you understand the nature of co-parenting, when she realized that she wasn't going to have a daughter with her all the time, and that she would spend alone time with dad, and she would be on her own. And I think that sort of the penny dropped, that that's not what she really wanted. And they've now started doing so many things together, because the whole point is it's identifying the problems and are the solutions to those problems. In the discernment phase, we're not looking for solutions, but they may find the solutions themselves during that phase.
That makes a lot of sense, because a lot of what we see is on the surface of things being the root cause of a divorce aren't the root cause at all. They are a symptom of the root cause. So there's a couple of questions that have come through. One in the chat, which is effectively saying, it doesn't feel safe staying in a comfortable relationship, but we argue a lot in front of the kids, and that arguing in front of the kids, maybe that what is it that's causing that? That is not the root cause. People don't start arguing in front of the kids for no reason, but that becomes the thing which, well, we can't stay together because we argue in front of the kids, which is a very rational thing to do because no one wants to be arguing in front of their kids. And similarly, there's quite a long kind of 2 questions in the Q and answer box, which I won't go through. There's a lot of detail in there, but it sounds quite a difficult situation stemming from, just to summarize, this the question is saying that they conceived a 3rd child at a difficult time, and their partner didn't want a 3rd child, and that's led to a lot of issues and some seemingly emotionally abusive behavior, and maybe this person has kind of identified actually the root cause, if there's that differentiation in terms of wanting a 3rd child, and then there's communication difficulties.
Yeah.
So it strikes me that those 2 examples kind of sum up, are we looking at a root cause and something that is leading to the problems in the relationship, and something that is merely a symptom of the relationship? I mean, is that accurate for me to say? If is that something that you see as people, getting that clarity between cause and symptom?
Yeah. And I've just pulled up that question.
Yeah.
And it said, the first thing it says was, her other half lost his father and then conceived the 3rd child at the funeral. I'm sure they didn't really mean literally at the funeral, but during the grieving time. And what the husband is battling with there is the grief of losing his father. So a lot of those will stem back to childhood problems, feeling of abandonment, loss, attachment, etc. And perhaps it wasn't the right time to get pregnant, but it's something that happened, and it's something that can be talked through. I'm obsessed with gentle parenting methods, but he's old-fashioned. I've lost that question. Is it gone now?
Sorry, that was my fault. I clicked off the wrong thing. There we go. It should be in the answered box. That was me trying to clear some space.
But that's a combination that's a situational problem rather than a marriage problem. And working through the grieving process can have a huge positive effect on that sort of situation. It's acknowledging the other person's emotions and differences in parenting styles, but there's always room for compromise. And this is where discernment comes in. Like mediation, it's helping people to see the other person's point of view and to see where compromises can be made.
One of the points that you've raised quite a few times now is about communication and how critical that is.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for people, simple tools that people can put into practice if they are really struggling to communicate, they feel that communication has broken down, but they genuinely want to make an effort to reinstate transparent communication with each other?
Very often it's not actually a problem in communication. It's just the way that we communicate, because we have no problem talking to the other person, even if we're shouting. We're still communicating, we're getting the words out, but it's the way that we do it. So it's helping people to take a time out, take a step back, and if they're not in the right headspace at that point in time to answer a question, say, give me a couple of minutes, I just need to think about what I'm going to say, because I'm sure we've all done it. We've all blurted out the wrong answer at the wrong time. So it's helping people to find strategies to make communication more positive, a more positive experience.
Going back to what we were talking about before with the stay as you are option, and particularly in light of the increase that you're seeing in that, Claire's asked, and I think this is probably true, and I'm sure you probably agree with this. Do you think the stay as you are option is also staying in something that's familiar because it's safe, even if it's uncomfortable? It's safe and it's known, and it's that, is it that better the devil you know thing? You know, we all, people fear the unknown, understandably. Is that something you see a lot?
Especially in older couples.
Mm.
You know, at one time it was the over 50s that was the fastest growing demographic in the divorce world. But since the financial crisis, they're now thinking, you know, let's just go live parallel lives. We can give them strategies to live more harmoniously. And in time, and you know, if you give them the right strategies, they might even get to know the other half better, because, you know, you do live these parallel lives, and if you can actually make the paths curve inwards rather than outwards by giving them strategies, you can change the nature of the relationship. But yeah, it is often better the devil you know than the devil you don't.
Yeah, I can see that with slightly older. Sorry, Jen, go on. You go ahead.
No, you carry on that answer.
No, I mean, I recognise that with slightly older clients that we have is, I mean, and a lot of that comes from, maybe there's a generational issue, you know, but I think a lot of it is older clients have been together longer, and generally, and that's, you know, if you've been together with someone for 75% of your life, and you're, you know, 80 or whatever, you know, then, and that happens, then the fear of change, and it's starting again, you know, people feel that starting again at a later age in life is a really difficult thing to do. So I completely understand that. Yeah. You know, there's also, it's still a bit of inbuilt stigma. I had I had a client who was getting divorced age, she was 90 and her husband was 92 when they were getting divorced. That's my oldest divorce couple. And she was just fabulous. She was great. She was such a lovely lady, and she was really well supported by her children. But every call we had, she would talk about how embarrassed she was, and I didn't make light of it. You know, I can understand that, because she thought it was ridiculous getting divorced at her age. She thought she was putting everyone to trouble. There was still a bit of stigma from divorce, you know, that she'll have grown up with in a way that, you know, that I won't have done. And that was really difficult for her. And I used to say, you know, come on, you're a rock star, you're a trendsetter, you're, you know, setting the way in your residential care home, and we'd sort of have a bit of a laugh about it. But, you know, so that fear of sort of judgment and stigma and people talking about you, I think is perhaps something, and that's quite an extreme example, obviously, in the 90s, but it does have an impact, I think, on older couples.
Oh yeah, I mean, for older couples that have been together probably 60, 65, maybe even 70 years, because they tended to get married much earlier in that generation, it does make you think, what was so bad that they can't live out the last few years that they've got? I think my advice would have been to go and live in separate nursing homes
Well, I think, you know, that was the fear. That is what other people would think. I mean, my view is if you're unhappy, then why waste your last few years being unhappy, was what I
Yeah.
would say, and that was her view. But yeah, it's the generational thing is really interesting, I think, and I can certainly see that. Another question Bobby's put in the Q&A, and this is a really interesting one, and I think quite a difficult position. I'll just read this. What or how can you propose or engage with discernment with someone who simply isn't willing to acknowledge that they have an issue which is causing a huge amount of stress within the family? My partner has had a troubled and difficult childhood and is in denial about how her past is dominating her existence in our marriage. We also live with my mother, and she's alienated my mother to such an extent that my mother simply wants her out of the house now. How can we move forward? So how does that work when you've got maybe this sort of domineering incident or history and it remains unacknowledged by the other party? That's got to be a real obstacle, I would have thought. Can you work around that? Is there things that you can do?
In that sort of case, I would be advising them to look at therapeutic counselling as the first step, because, you know, we've only got 5 sessions and we cannot solve childhood trauma problems that have been brought into the marriage. And once they can acknowledge the problem, they're part way then to solving it, because, you know, so many people are in denial that their childhood hasn't affected their adulthood, but it does. You know, we get this cellular memory of trauma from childhood, and that comes through because we expect our adult relationships to be very different. And when we see the same sort of behaviours in the later stages of marriage, you know, once the honeymoon period is over and we settle down to everyday life, you know, we're not seeing all this high romance and high sexual activity. You know, we settle down to everyday life, and then the traumas from childhood then start raising their heads again, because are we being neglected? Are we being rejected? And those feelings keep coming up, especially, you know, if they have had a very traumatic.
If someone isn't, I mean, in this case, it seems that, you know, Bobby's partner isn't willing to acknowledge it. He's said, you know, that she's in denial. She doesn't believe in talking about problems. She's, you know, mad at him because he's talked to her best friend about the problems because he needs to talk about something that was going on. You know, if someone is that opposed to even engaging with the, you know, if you've got an issue about the marriage and the other person is just unwilling to engage with it in any way, shape or form, or acknowledge that there's a problem, is that something, can discernment counselling, can it find a way in? Can it find a sort of chink of light to get in there? But, you know, I mean, obviously if someone literally won't participate in it, there's not a lot that you can do, is there? Frankly, you know, you can't lead a horse to water.
You have 2 willing
Yeah.
people coming into the discernment. I do an intake session with both separately, so I talk to both of them about, you know, what their view of the marriage is, and what the, you know, do they see that there is something worth saving before I take them on. And that's then that I do the screening for abuse.
I think, you know, this might be a bit trite, or possibly this is you're a divorce lawyer, you would say that, wouldn't you, kind of an answer. But it seems to me that if in Bobby's case, if there is something so hugely important to him in the relationship, and, you know, he suggests discernment counselling, and if his wife is refusing to engage and refusing to give him the respect and the dignity of going through a process that he considers is essential to potentially save the marriage, that's sort of your answer, isn't it? You know, if someone won't engage, look, I think our marriage is on the rocks and we need to consider what we're going to do. Will you do discernment counselling? If someone says, well, no, I won't do it, that's sort of the answer, isn't it?
Yeah.
The marriage
Yeah.
probably isn't capable of saving, and that is a very hard thing to hear. I acknowledge. I don't say that glibly in any way, but if someone doesn't respect you enough to engage with a process that you think is crucial for your happiness,
Yeah,
then that probably speaks volumes about the future of the marriage.
it does. It does. And especially, it says she's been in a she's been dominated as a child, and or her past is dominating her existence now. If she's not acknowledging the fact that she's had a traumatic upbringing, and that she's bringing that into the current relationship, then and now she's alienating the mother-in-law. How do they move forward unless somebody is willing to work on themselves and the problem? Then is there a solution?
Yeah, I mean, I completely see that, and it's you can't force someone to this process. But looking at this a bit more, obviously it's a really difficult situation. I'm very sorry to hear that, Bobby. It sounds like you're going through a really horrible time, and there are no easy answers there. And I mean, discernment isn't about easy answers. It can't be easy answers. It's big decisions. But I think, for me, hearing, and I've been aware of it, and for anyone listening, me and Sue do a fair few things together and connected on LinkedIn and stuff, and I've been really looking forward to this because I'll come back to what you said at the start. So it's probably magnified. No one expects a divorce lawyer to try and save other people's relationships because they think, well, it's not really great for your business, is it? But I always speak to clients, and I say, I've had a couple of people halfway through a divorce reconcile, so it does happen. But generally, if you start the process, it's going to go in one direction. So you've got to make sure you're absolutely certain before you go down it. And I think to kind of let's make it a bit more positive again, maybe. To have that ability to offer something to someone, and there's a real great, I think, peace of mind and peace of self in knowing that you've tried everything that you can do. And if you have tried everything that you can do, and that is counselling, or well, it can be anything. It can be counselling, or the way if you're disagreeing about parenting, you try and change the way you parent, or it can be discernment coaching, or it can be the way you load the dishwasher, which is a conversation that we had earlier today about how important that can be in a relationship. Whatever it may be, if you feel like you've tried, and suggesting discernment counselling or trying before you go through it, it gives you a real peace of mind. And Jen, I don't know if you agree with this, but I feel that the clients who feel like they really tried to work on the marriage and save the marriage go through the divorce a bit easier and find it a little bit more easier. Or is that me being horrendously naive about things? What do you think?
No, I do agree with you, and likewise, Matt, if I ever am speaking to someone who's unsure of where they stand, maybe the conversation has been raised by their partner, and they've said, oh, I think we should consider a divorce, or maybe it's something that's been bubbling away under the surface and they think, I really need to get some advice on this before I do anything because this is a really scary prospect. I will always say, you've got to take your time. This is a huge step. You've got to be sure it's the right step. Relationships are complicated, relationships are messy, there may well be children involved, there are almost always financial matters to consider, so do take your time. And if that time involves a counsellor or a therapist or whatever is best in your circumstances, then it is well worth exploring that before going down this route, because as Matt says, it's going to head one way. And on that sort of slight positive note, Sue, I was wondering if you have any tips for anyone who is thinking, this does sound like a really practical and sensible thing to explore in more depth, but I don't even know where to begin in suggesting this. How would you approach that conversation, or how would you suggest someone approaches that conversation with their other half?
More often than not, one person will contact me. And when I say, discernment is for both partners, can I speak to your other half? Then it's up to them, you know, think, oh, should I, shouldn't I? Because I only want willing players. I don't want anybody to be forced, because that's bordering on coercion. And, you know, even if they are not enthusiastic at the start, the fact that they are willing to talk about the problems, or their perception of the problems, which, as I say, is often completely different to the other person's perception of the problems, but working with them to help them to see the other person's point of view and what they, you know, what they're doing, even if it seems trivial to a lot of people. You know, some of the problems seem very trivial, but because they're so important to that person, they need to be opened up and expressed. And looking at, you know, for me, the important thing is, what was your role in that? How do you see it playing out from your point of view?
That's really, really helpful and really interesting too. I think that it's probably a nice point to kind of wrap things up as we're just hitting the hour mark. Unless anybody else has got any other questions, I'd like to thank everyone for the questions that they submitted, and for, you know, talking about things that are very personal and not easy to talk about. I really hope that's some use. I will certainly be flagging up discernment and counselling to my clients who are, you know, thinking about things and making that initial inquiry. I think it was a really useful resource. Just to sum up and say that if there is going to be an email sent out after this with a link to the webinar so people can revisit things. If you need any further advice, and Sue, how can people contact you? What's the best way?
Email Dr. Sue at divorce-doctor.com. That's the easiest way. And Bobby's put a further explanation on about the situation. Bobby, if you want to contact me, I'll talk it through with you.
Thank you. That's really kind. Best of luck, Bobby, and best of luck message with your difficult personal situations. You know, really hope you can make things work out and do the thing that's best for you. Just a final sign, I have to refer you to some of our other resources. We've got tons of stuff. If you Google Stowe support, that's our hub that's got everything about divorce, finances, children, domestic abuse, links to webinars, links to talks. People like Sue and other divorce coaches. Claire, who's in our chat, has been joining in and asking us some great questions. She's done some things for us. There's a podcast. Do, you know, download that and tune in. Everyone, thanks for joining. Sue, thank you so much for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. And yeah, have a lovely evening, everyone. And